So this is Connie Kubiak, and it's April 11th, 2025, and it's my pleasure to be interviewing Vicki Sexton for the ASET Historical Advisory Committee. Vicki, where and when did you receive your credentials, and where do you currently work?
So I currently work at Penn Medicine, the clinical educator, and I received my EEG accreditation in Boston in 1990. I got my nerve conduction in Philadelphia in 2000. I have to write stuff down because I forget. My EPs in Washington, D.C. in 2003, my CLTM at a testing site in Philadelphia, and I grandfathered into the CNCT in 2011.
What drew you to EEG and neurodiagnostics?
So a friend of mine worked with an EEG tech, and I kept saying, I want to go back to school for something, but I don't really want to go back to like a 4-year college. And so he introduced me to the EEG tech, and she gave me some of her books to read a little bit just to see if I would be interested. And I just thought the brain was so interesting that I was like, oh yes, this is for me. This is it. And that was back in like 1980. Well, I started school in 88, but that was probably back in 87.
Was this a popular specialty when you were starting your career?
No, nobody ever heard of EEG. Even in the hospitals, I would roll around with my EEG machine, and nurses would say, "What is that? What are you doing?" So no, it was all word of mouth. Everybody in my class that in 88, it was all word of mouth or somebody they knew had an EEG.
Who were your early mentors?
So I would say I had a few. I had Betty Jo Riley, Theda Sannett, and Pat Smith.
What were your earliest career influences?
So I would say techs like Linda Kelly, Maureen Carroll, they were involved and they volunteered a lot for like ASET and Brett. And I think they motivated me more to get involved and showed me how to get more involved in those two societies.
If you had not become an EEG technologist, what would you like to have done?
Well, I thought about becoming a PA. It was just starting in the Philadelphia region, and they were giving incentives. Some hospitals were allowing you to work and they were paying you, and then you would just do the PA part. Now it's a little bit more involved. You had to have your, almost bachelor's or master's or whatever it is. But back then it was just kind of, take just the PA classes. But I'm glad I stuck with the EG.
Why do you think the field took off when and how it did?
I feel like the media is giving neurology a lot more attention than it used to. So before it was always cancer and cardiology, but now it seems like the media is focusing on the brain, maybe because of people like Michael J. Fox and football players getting like concussions and things like that. Also, I think too, because the baby boomers are now starting to have strokes and dementia and things like that. So I believe that that's, why it's becoming more popular.
What equipment did you train on, and what were the limitations of it?
So I trained on the grass equipment where you had to actually punch in your montages, and there was no video, there was no remontaging, there was ink flying everywhere. So the biggest one was that you couldn't remontage. So the tech themselves had to be very savvy. And so if you saw something that was better looked at in, say, a transverse montage or a reference montage, you had to think and say, I better change this or my doctor's going to kill me. So
what other equipment have you used over the years, and could you summarize the pros and cons?
So I worked on Nihon Koden. There was no punching in the montages, so that was definitely a pro. But the con was at the time they were using time constants instead of low frequency filters. So you really had to know what the conversion was. And that was really back then, that was the only equipment I had worked on as far as analog. Now we're doing digital. So the pros obviously would be having video, having the physician, whoever's looking at it, you can remontage to make sure, was that real? Was that just an artifact? Let me change the montage. Is it still there? So that's pretty much it.
What memories do you have of your training program?
Well, I'm still good friends with everyone that I went to EEG school with, even after all these years. And another one was I was the only student that was actually able to go into the OR and see them doing surgery on the brain. And I remember asking, could I take a Polaroid shot of it and bring it into class so I could show all my other students so that they could actually see that. That was fun.
What are the main ways in which the field has changed over your career?
So I think that just the whole becoming digital and adding the videos, and then of course the IOM field exploding. When I first started, there was no accreditation for it. We were just thrown in the OR. I mean, I went under a pretty strict training with Mark Stecker. So, but I wasn't just thrown in, I was very much trained. But I think they're like the two biggest things that have changed. And then also more long-term monitoring for ICU. That also, we started doing it even with paper, but we'd have the nurse run in and record for 10 minutes every hour on the hour. And then in the morning, you were picking up piles and piles of paper and putting it in order. So, not having to deal with the big, huge stacks of paper and carrying them around is a big change.
How has scientific knowledge changed the field, and what do you think were the big breakthroughs?
Well, like I said, the LTM EMU has come a long way with the neuro brain stimulators and stereotactic instead of using the grids. And obviously the digital, instead of using analog, that's a big breakthrough.
What are two or three big issues in EEG that people are working on to solve today?
So I think staffing is a huge issue. We all know that there is a huge shortage of EEG techs throughout the country, if not throughout the world, obviously. So I think one of the reasons too is because now we're required to staff those EMU monitoring units 24/7 to get the full reimbursement from the insurance companies. So before we were only worrying about staffing from 8 to 5 and then on call for the rest of the time. Now we have to find somebody to cover all three shifts or 2 and 2 12 hours. I think that's where we were already short and now we're even shorter because of that.
What are the main areas of professional discussion or disagreement today?
So I think technologists to having to formalize training versus on the job. I think that is always a discussion, always a disagreement. But now there's, a few KHEP accredited online programs, and I don't know if there's any ABREP, but I know there's at least 3 KHEP approved online courses. So you could work in your department while you're getting paid and still be a student, which had changed also because before it was if you're a student, you can't work there. You had to almost quit your job to be a student to work there. So that changed because we realized like nobody's going to quit a full-time job to go to school. So we kind of changed that where you could work and go through a program. And I feel that, nowadays there's not that many excuses. So before there wasn't online programs and, all the great, EEG techs had been on the job trained, obviously. Like even Theta Sanet was trained by a physician, a neurologist sat and trained them. And I will tell you, I worked with her and she knew more than most neurologists out in the country. So I'm not disputing that these people were great and are great. What I'm saying now is nowadays we have that. And if we're trying to uplift our field rather to radiology, respiratory therapy, then we have to require the same thing. Maybe not for new programs in respiratory, any new program starts has to be a bachelor's, but there were still associate programs out there and they were still recognized. So I'm not saying like we all have to get an associate's or a bachelor's, but we can get a certificate. And these online programs are 12 months, so they can do this while they're working. So that's I think our biggest, headbutting.
I agree.
Yeah.
One of many, right?
Yeah.
What are you most proud of in your professional life?
I think I would say proud, I would say maybe that people know my name. I don't, you know what I mean? Because I do volunteer because I know that, in societies, whatever they are, in your church or whatever in the society, only about 10% of the people that work there or that belong there actually volunteer. So I always feel like there's never enough volunteers. So I volunteer for like everything. I guess I feel like I want to give back to my society what they gave me. They gave me a career. They gave me something that not everybody can do my job. You can't just pluck somebody off the street and go, here you go, and they're going to be as good as somebody who's, been doing this for a long time. So I feel like, those are the things that I'm most proud of with this field that I'm in.
Where do you see neurodiagnostics in 10 years?
I see more at home monitoring. The reason why I say that is because there's a lot of 24/7 stuff that people have to like now view. And we all know that even though Persist helps us or these other programs will help us, it's not the same as having human eyes on it. And I think they're trying to do where they have people have implants in their head and they have EEG recording. And so they're going to have somebody look at that. The physicians can't take all that on. And so I think there's going to be a lot more techs who are either reading or troubleshooting equipment that they've like now put into people or done, that kind of stuff where I think it's going to be the techs are going to have the more eyes on than in the past.
What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Let me think. The best piece of advice. I guess one of the best things is you don't have to know everything. If you don't be afraid to ask. If you're not sure about a pattern or you see something on the EEG, don't be afraid to ask, because I watch these meetings that we have with our physicians and they're doing record review and they're all arguing over what it is. So I tell my students and my techs, I go, do you see this? I said, and these are considered the best neurologists in the country. And they're arguing over the patterns that they're seeing. So don't feel like you have to know this and that you're a failure if you don't.
Is there anyone else in electroencephalography that you think would be beneficial for us to talk with?
I mean, I would say, someone like Linda Kelly and Maureen Carroll. I mean, they've been in the field. Well, Linda not as long as me, but Maureen definitely longer than me. I'm trying to think. You probably talk to mostly everybody else. It's like I feel like we have this like little family, like we all know each other and we all, you know what I mean? So I would say those two just because I know they've been in the field just as long. Oh, there's another woman. Her name's Denise LaFales, and she is the director over at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I can send you her email, but she was actually on the job trained at Graduate Hospital, which was like one of the first centers to do like have an EMU, an epilepsy monitoring unit. And so she has a different perspective than like say myself or the other two, because we went through a program. She kind of went through like that they did their own program there. And
Trial by fire.
Exactly. So I would say her too, and I can send you her email.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Who are the prominent electroencephalographers, living or deceased, who should be documented?
Well, I would say deceased, Lawrence Green, Dr. Green. I think you had
did he
gotten,
pass?
Yeah, he
Oh,
passed in 2001, 2002. So I'll say him just because he
okay.
started the program at Crozier over 50 years ago. I know he had given you some books and stuff, I believe.
Yes.
From his
Yep. He had kept a ton of his conference brochures with his notes in them. And he wrote a note in there and he said, I don't want to throw these away. Somebody's got to make use out of them. So what I did is I divvied them up and I sent them to whichever organization did the conference. So ACNS, AES, the New England Society, the Southern Society. I mean, he had just this wide variety of things. So
Yeah.
if you could have a conversation with any neurodiagnostic related scientist, living or dead, who would they be and why?
I would say Niedermeyer, Dr. Niedermeyer. And I mean, I guess I don't know. I just want to pick their brain. Like, what made you think of this? What made you, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, what was the thought patterns, because they were like the beginning people. And Hans Berger, again, same reason, just, what made you think of this? What made you want to like look at this? Were you trying to find something else and you found this? And I know he had severe depression, and you know what I mean? And it was just like, well, what happened? Like, you were the cutting edge here. What happened? So
Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience? We're sort of winding up here at the end, but sometimes the questions don't cover everything that people want to say. So
yeah, I would say you should try to volunteer. Just get on a society, a task force, a committee, just something, and because you feel so involved, and at least go to one in-person conference, especially the annual conference. I would say every time I leave there, I feel like I'm like empowered, like I'm like, yay, gee. So if you feel like you're getting in a rut, you go to this conference and you're surrounded by like people and you learn. I mean, I learn something every year, and I've been doing this over 35 years. So to learn something every time you go is just an amazing feat in itself. And just being around all the EEG techs, it really is very uplifting.
great.